Hello everybody. So in this first video, I just want to wrap up the fixed forms by talking about the Ballade, which was the last one of those, and then get into the Ars Subtilior, which the textbook mentions a little bit. So the Ballade was the most prestigious of the three fixed forms, meaning it typically had the most voices in terms of polyphony, the loftiest kind of texts, and then the most sophisticated musical techniques. The form for the Ballade can actually be expressed in a couple ways. So that's A B C, B C, etc. Or, and this will actually make something a little bit clearer, sometimes the refrain happens at the beginning, and then you get A B B. A B B C, A B B C, A, etc. And you can see we talked about this earlier with the virelai, I believe, one of the other fixed forms, that this is our bar form and this is also our bar form because it's just same, different, same, different. We also talked about how all these fixed forms are just some combination of bar form and refrain, and the similarity between this and the virelai, and the virelai, or the kind of difference between this and the virelai, is that in the virelai, these two, I believe, use the same music, or they shared some of the same music, and in this case, the refrain, let me say this again. In the virelai, the bar form and the refrain share some music. In a ballade, the refrain is distinct music, right? The A never shows up here in the bar form. That's why it's notated C up here. Okay, let's listen real quick to a little bit of this. You can hear it a little bit, but if you look at it, you can see that this music is pretty nuts. You can hear some of the syncopations right off the bat, and then when you get down into this area, you start to see all these duplets, right? And if we keep scrolling, it gets even wilder on the last page with stuff like this and all of this craziness. This style is called the Ars Subtilior. Which means the subtle art, or the more subtle art. And it was kind of the ultimate in showing off. And this makes sense that we're getting an example of Ars Subtilior in a ballade, because remember, the ballade was the most prestige, and showing off was also associated with that. Now, one way that the composer of En Remirant, Philippus de Caserta, one way that de Caserta was showing off was by actually quoting Machaut. So de Caserta was from a later generation. Machaut was already known as probably the greatest musician of the 1300s, and so Caserta quoted him twice. He quotes a bit of text from one of Machaut's poems, and he quotes some of his music in the refrain. And I'm just bringing up this idea of quotation because in the 1400s, in chapters 8 and 9, this is actually going to become really an important part of the culture. The other way that Caserta was showing off was by kind of maximizing the complexity that was available to him through the Ars Nova system. So I mentioned this earlier, after the Ars Nova system was introduced, it became pretty common to change mensuration signs at important structural moments, like to help you articulate the form in a motet or in another music. So at the end of the cursus of a tenor, you might change mensuration signs to mark that you're starting another run through, or at the end of a verse of a poem, you might change mensuration signs. So you'll often see this, and we did see this in an example that we looked at. You know, at the beginning it says 9/8 in the transcription, and then at some important point it changes to 3/4 or something like that. Composers of the Ars Subtilior thought, well, what if I just did this all the time and all at the same time? So instead of just having kind of horizontal successions of mensuration signs one after another, they stack them up vertically so that all the different voices are in different levels with their own kind of ways of dividing the notes up. It's like having all the voices in their own meter. And they actually went even further, inventing their own signs and borrowing signs from the Italian method of notation that we'll talk about, that showed up in the 1300s that we'll talk about in a minute. So for example, this guy, a backward C, meant to have the note values. So everything would move twice as fast, or you could think of it as 4 minims to a semi-breve instead of 2, this kind of thing. And then there were other symbols that were used just for particular situations. So here's one, looks like a semi-breve, but it has this. A stem that goes up and a stem that goes down, and that meant 4 minims in the time of 3. You know, signs like these were really specialized, just used in particular circumstances, and they didn't really live on past the Ars Subtilior. But this kind of complexity is similar to some of the stuff that we talked about at the end of History 2, for those of you who were with me in that class. The idea of composers getting deeply into a system and then just enjoying the complexity of that system, and not worrying so much about what it actually sounds like to the listeners. So for, you know, folks we talked about, you can maybe think of someone like Pierre Boulez or Milton Babbitt and the total serial techniques that they were involved in. And there's even, very weirdly, some early graphic notation. Here is an example from last semester with George Crumb, right, where he wrote a piece of music that looks like a peace sign. And here is an example from the Ars Subtilior, a piece of music that's kind of shaped like a heart. Yeah, so they were just getting wild with everything. All right, in the next video, we will look at what Italy was getting up to.